Yes, indeed, folks. You're listening to Blue Please here on WoW Radio. Time for the Illusion of Choice! Yes, indeed. Now, this is an interesting little email that I've received. I say little, that would be a lie. From Jake Mayback, and he says this. He was looking at a blog called Critical QQ, whatever that might be, and it was regarding the separation of PvE and PvP. And apparently, the first segment of this blog, it was a two-parter, said that RNG is indeed good for the game, but only certain parts of it. Other places, such as resists, need to be static in order for player skills to play even the smallest part in PvP combat. And the second part, he clearly states that PvE and PvP are two different parts of the game that should be thrown as far away from each other as possible. What a spell does in PvE should be completely different to what it does in PvP. He gives an example of using the Deep Freeze ability, where it would say just do a truckload of damage in the Raiding Frost Maze's rotation. And in PvP it wouldn't do that. Now, he says, the average moron such as myself would assume that the statement is perfectly logical and makes perfect sense. Why, after all, should a person who raids 12 hours a week and doesn't even know what the acronym PvP stands for have to be bothered by class balance in arenas, affecting their performance in the weekly raids? And why should the hardcore gladiator have his abilities limited because their class was outperforming everyone else in the first person's raid? They are two completely different halves of the game. The average moron such as myself thinks ought to stay that way. How would you, and what would you say about dividing spell mechanics, damage, and effects between PvE and PvP? This one again. There was a post recently, I believe, by Ghostcrawler, and I can't find the specific post, but I can summarise what it said. That was, the reason we don't do this is because the game's complicated enough already, especially for the average player, and if you add in more elements like that, then you're going to end up with people getting utterly and totally confused. It's like, you've got a tooltip now that is pretty large, and some abilities which are not entirely clear. Now we add a second tooltip for what it does in PvP. I can see where he's coming from with that. Admittedly, to be honest, it has worked in other games. I believe Warhammer Online, as I recall, abilities do work slightly differently in PvP as they do in PvE. I don't think there's massive changes by any means. I don't think every ability's got like a PvP and a PvE element. But to be honest, I don't see the need to separate them that much. It's nice to think that they should be separated, but honestly, it's not the case. And it can never really be the case. Unless you want two completely different sets of abilities, which is a massive amount of work. It really is. Personally, I don't take the PvP game seriously. I mean, why would I? I'm a raider. I think raiding's the only challenging bit of content. And if I want a PvP, I'll play a proper game. Like EVE Online. EVE Online's got better PvP, or Warhammer Online, or even better, something that actually requires skill, as opposed to MMO-style clicking and how many people you have in your particular group, like, say, Counter-Strike, or Quake Live. Something that really, truly requires actual player skill, and rewards it proportionally. I find PvP to be something of an amusing minigame. But I recognise that a lot of people do get a lot of enjoyment out of it, and some people even do take the arena seriously, and as to why I really cannot imagine, but okay, different strokes for different folks. I think the eternal balancing act is going to continue to happen regardless of whether or not you do this. I do get annoyed when PvP affects my PvE, but to be honest, usually it all evens out in the end. Like, mages took, like, a hefty nerf in the Arcane spec, for instance. Arcane Barrage got nerfed to make it less powerful in PvP, which directly affected the PvE rotation. Yet Arcane mages are still competitive. A lot of changes that have happened in that regard. It generally all works out. Whether or not you are uber competitive in a raid should matter less than your ability to raid. Yeah, your ability to do the job properly. Being uber DPS or uber healer is great, but if you're the guy standing in the fire, then that's not going to help you. And no amount of class balancing is going to change your ability to not stand in the fire. And that's probably about as close to bring the player, not the class, as I will get. The thing is, this has always been the case. It's always been the case that no matter how vital a class you were, or how great DPS or great healing you were, if you couldn't master the mechanics of the fight in question, then you weren't brought to the raid. This is something Blizzard, I think, seems to have missed the point on. Bring the player, not the class, has always existed. It doesn't matter if you officially endorse and move towards that policy. It's always existed. Real guilds don't take people on the basis of class, they took people on the basis of ability. But they also realised that you take the right tools for the job. You don't try and stick a square peg in a round hole. You bring a proper, varied, but precise set of tools. And then you also bring proper workmen to use those tools. You can have great workmen, lousy tools, or you can have lousy tools, great workmen. It's going to break one way or the other. They're both interdependent. So I don't see why bring the player, not the class, is now suddenly an issue, when it's been like that for years. I can't see them really separating it, to be honest. I don't think they want to split the game in two, and I would kind of agree with that, because having a cohesive world is important to an MMO. It's very important. I see the elements the elements should be optional. I see that being a good thing, absolutely. But that's as far as the divide should go. They've already tried to mix PvE and PvP with varying degrees of success, and will probably continue to do so. And as much as I would like WoW to be a purely PvE game, it isn't. And it's never going to happen, and I have to accept that. And if I want a purely PvE game, then I can go and play one. I can vote with my feet as a consumer and go and play another game. In the meantime, I've got to accept the reality of what WoW actually is, and that's a PvP/PvE game. With near enough equal emphasis put on both. And one of them is going to affect the other. Now, being a truly rounded player would, of course, involve playing both and having a good understanding of both. And personally, I don't PvP. I used to. Not anymore. I didn't find it all that entertaining. But I think you're just going to have to accept it. There isn't a lot you can do about it, really. Complaining about balance issues is very tiresome. It's been going on for a very, very long time. You have to accept that Blizzard is pretty good at it. Better than most. I mean, good lord, the imbalances in other games are insane. You've got to bear in mind that this is the same company that developed StarCraft, the most balanced RTS in the entire universe. 3 completely different factions, totally balanced to the point where South Korea has made an actual sport out of it. That's how balanced they believe it is. There's a serious money going around over there. So yeah, they can do it. But the thing is, it's a long-term process. The worst thing you can do is react to a change and say, oh, well, they changed this in PvP. It's nerfed my PvE ability somewhat. Cry, QQQ, change it now. No, they can't just change it now, because that has a knock-on effect on everything else. It's a massive interconnected web of abilities that, if you change one, everything else is affected. You can't just make knee-jerk reactions. We've seen that happen before. It causes massive breakage. Huge, horrible imbalance. It's even worse than just leaving it well alone. So yeah, the separation of PvE and PvP is a pipe dream. You might like one over the other, but just don't expect Blizzard to put a big wall in the middle and say PvPers go this side, PvEers go this side. It's just not going to happen. It's obviously not part of their design methodology. As close as you're going to get to it is Tournament Realms, really. As much as I'd like Raiding Realms that had no PvP on it, we don't have that. I trust that Blizzard will manage to find the balance. I think that Blizzard needs to look more into abilities that are solely useful in PvP. It's like Deep Freeze. Like saying, oh, well, Deep Freeze sucks, blah, 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 because of this. Impact sucks, blah, 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 because of this. No, I'm okay with that. I just think the way that the talents are set up is not conducive to speccing properly into PvP and PvE all the time. Sometimes you end up taking junk talents. Like, I've had to take junk talents for a proper Frostfire spec, and that bothers me. I think that perhaps the way that talents are designed needs to be looked at. Because if you give more flexibility with the talents that you can take, then you can just go nuts with the abilities. It's like, for instance, stuff like Frostbite. Purely a grinding/PvP ability. It's useless in raids, utterly worthless. Yet it's tier 1 talent. Now, if you split up the talent trees in such a way that allowed you to just take purely PvE stuff, then you could put plenty of PvE spells in there, abilities that could be learned via talents, and plenty of PvP, and no one would care. And if those spells had specifically strong effects on PvP, then the arena game would shift to being based around that. And then you can twiddle with them to your heart's content, and it's not going to affect PvE, and vice versa. That's probably the best thing you can do. saying to, oh, let's change Deep Freeze is missing the point. No, there should be more stuff like Deep Freeze, but the talent tree should be arranged in such a way that you don't have to take Deep Freeze to get any further, and that there is a better, say, 51-point talent. Is Deep Freeze 51? I believe it is. That's the 5-second stun talent, isn't it? I don't spec in that crappy tree. It should be designed so that the 51-point talent is not a PvP talent, or there should be dual 51-point talents. 2 different paths on each tree. 2 different 51-point talents. You want the PvP? Take that one. You want the PvE? Take that one. Then you can balance both independently because the PvE players don't have that ability, so it doesn't affect them. And the PvP players don't have that ability, so it doesn't affect them, so they don't have to worry about it. Then you can balance around those abilities and keep your core abilities the same. It's probably the best way to do it, at least in my honest opinion. My name is Total Biscuit, you've been listening to Blue Please here on WoW Radio. It is time for shout-outs. So if you want to shout out, then email them at gmail.com. Alternatively, send me an email on IRC. Yes, this is what you want to do. Good evening, TV. This one is from Luke Cameron Mikulski, and he says this: not sure if this remains the location to request shout-outs. It is. Or even if you do shout-outs within your show, I do. If not, then very sorry. No, you're not. I've only just recently rejoined WoW, and its community, and like yourself, have been playing since release, well, actually beta. Upon joining the game, I've rejoined and listening to the show. I'm very glad to see that your unbarred rants and general anger at things are still going. Well, anger is deserved. It has still existed for all this time. Keep up the good form after all these years. If possible, give a shout out to Leek and Tamazi here in London, UK. Shout out so given to you. A shout out to Aerith from Motrex. Hurry up, girl, and level faster. Long live Titan. Well, you're a little bit late on that one. That's all I can say. AGB can have a shout out, but can you give a resounding bollocks? Okay, yeah, I can give a resounding bollocks. Yeah, there you go. You have a resounding bollocks. It's been given to you. Greetings, TB. Angrim from Nordrasil EU here. I'd like to give a big shout out to my fellow guild members, Cyrix and Celestis, for my guild post-mortem. Can I give a shout out to Loyal to NES, my very own personal Warcraft 3 World Editor Encyclopedia. Okay, there you go. A shout out to the bleep who hacked my account. That's from Nihilus. Get an encoder. I'd like to send a shout out to my guild, Conspiracy on Twisting Nether, for helping me with the last heroic glory of the Raider Meta achievement and helping me in 20-man Nax, and I hate Anathema. Speaking of Anathema, a shout out to Ariana for getting her Anathema in Molten Core last week in Arcanist Belt. That's 2 priests with benedictions for the win. Funnily enough, she actually has to use benediction because of the way that they've changed healing talents. Anathema is now a worse DPS staff than benediction. Oh, if I had a word, I wish I had some kind of drop in like Octail and Hordak to facepalm that. I mean, I suppose this will have to do. Fail. Total fail in design there from Blizzard. I'd like to give a shout out to Mr. NNJ, Seath Davlin, and all the Chill Whisper Scourge on Worm Rest Accord US. That's from Tom and Tom. A shout out to the. I'm not saying that. Good lord, Seath. A shout out to Arcanist for being the best set ever. That's from Mustachio Nut. Oh dear. Can I give a shout out to and from Dobmeister on Thunderhorn EU, to my former guildmates on Gloria Phoenix and my newfound friends at Storm Knights. Many thanks. Let's check the email box. A shout out to Death by Trey on Proudmoore US. The blood will flow across the canteen floor. That's great. I'm going to get a shout out for Sam Thor for joining me in my Diablo 2 awesomeness. And a big shout out to the Koreans, Nerf you! Cheers from Totems at Kazakh EU. Hey, TB, it's Ice. Could you give a shout out to all the Pokemon TCG players in Memphis and St. Louis? Shout out so given. Remember to take your naps, kiddies. I'd like to give a shout out to Moment of Silence at Dalaman US for achieving Glory of the Raider last Friday. Cheers, well done, you won the RNG. A shout out to Kings and Queens guilds on Sunstrider EU and Amnesia the Mage. I would do, but sorry, I forgot. ATB, can I give you a big shout out to my Guild Obsidian Knights for being with me for the last 4 years? Yes, I can. That's from Delicious Mold. And a shout out to myself, Uzus, and my real life GF, ZomG, called Centane, and the Longhorns for bugging Shade of Iran by soloing him successfully. That's from Blades Edge EU. My friends, ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, I am out of time. If you don't like my anger, then don't listen to my show. That's all I can say. If you don't like what I say on my Twitter feed, don't watch it. Shade yourself inside your little barrier of delusional reality. It's this show. We try to bring out the truth, however ugly it may be. And all I can say is, I love every minute of it. and hopefully you do too. My name is Bitol Biscuit. You've been listening to Blue Please. Check out our other fine shows on WCRadio.com. At the moment, our podcasts are currently broken, unfortunately, but you can still download the latest shows from the front page and our shows page. We'll have all of that stuff up to date, hopefully in the next couple of days, and back and functional. If you like what we're doing, you can donate. Oh no, it's donating! You're not allowed to do that, because you use Blizzard music. Therefore, everything you do belongs to Blizzard. I think not. You may donate if you like what we do here to wowradiodonations@gmail.com. That is wowradiodonations@gmail.com. And we shall invest the money in buying new equipment and paying the server bandwidth bills, as we always do. Ladies and gentlemen, I've had a fantastic time tonight. Hopefully you have too. And I shall see you on Friday for yet another episode of Blue Please. Be well, be happy, and if you see something you don't like, then for God's sake, shout it from the rooftops. Good night.